Hi, and welcome to The Parent Equation with me, Aisha Murray. I'm a coach and I primarily support working parents and carers who believe that parenthood shouldn't be a barrier to a successful and fulfilling career. In this podcast series, I chat to inspirational working parents and ask them to share their own experiences of raising children alongside their careers. We talk about the struggles and the moments of joy. And I hope in each episode there's something that can bring you a bit more strength and positivity. So please follow, listen and subscribe on all major platforms. So welcome to this week's episode of The Parent Equation. I'm really glad to be joined today by Georgie Ma. Georgie works in marketing, has a young daughter and describes herself as a BBC, British-born Chinese, something which we'll go into more obviously during this episode. And Georgie also has her own podcast called Chinese Chippy, which I've listened to, and hence why you're on the show today. So welcome, Georgie.
Oh, thank you. This is so exciting.
It is. I'm really glad to have you on.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's quite nice to be a guest rather than the host.
Host of your own podcast.
I know, because then it's quite nice just to. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed doing my podcast talking about the ESEA community. Oh, so when I say ESEA, I mean, it's just the acronym for East and Southeast Asian.
Okay.
But again, it's just after this show, I feel like I spend hours editing the podcast, but I know with you, once we've done the show, I'm like, okay, see you later, bye.
Yeah, that's it. And then I have to do the editing. There won't be much editing to do, I'm sure. So let's start the podcast then. So Chinese Chippy Girl.
Yes.
Let's start by telling me a bit about how and why did you start this podcast?
So at one of my previous jobs a few years ago, actually when I was pregnant, so around 2018, I worked for a new startup company, and every Friday we would do a show and tell where one person gets up and they talk about something which they're interested in for about 15, 20, 25 minutes. So I did a show and tell on my family migrating to the UK. And it was just a really short presentation. My part was just, my presentation was for about 15 minutes. And I spoke about how my parents came to the UK, how they opened up a takeaway, how I was brought up in a takeaway, some of the microaggressions that I experienced at school, being the only Chinese person at school until my brother joined 2 years later. Then there was 2 Chinese people. And to be honest, I didn't really think much of it. But at the end, where your final presentation, your final slide is, thank you, do you have any questions? And I felt like everyone had their hand up. And this short presentation, just the Q&A just went on for quite a while because people had questions. And it was really like, it wasn't until after that I thought, hold on a second, there's quite a lot of questions. And it kind of made me feel like the BBC community was misrepresented. There weren't enough voices. And honestly, it's been in my mind for like a couple of years thinking maybe I should start a podcast. Yeah. And it wasn't until when did I start? It wasn't until around June this year it wasn't until June last year in 2020 that I created a separate Instagram page called Chinese Chippy Girl. And I started building a network of other BBCs and East and Southeast Asian community. And then in August, I just bit the bullet and just started my own podcast. And that's where my first episode was released. And I spoke about, again, this is my life growing up in a Chinese takeaway, managing my parents' takeaway when I was 10, translating all their documents because they didn't really read English. And yeah, just working at my parents' shop pretty much every evening, every weekend. And yeah, and I guess for me, the Black Lives Matter, that was very instrumental again to why I promoted this, because I guess for people of colour in general, it's been quite a tough time for a lot of us at the moment. I guess with the pandemic, being Chinese, we've been blamed for carrying the virus, for spreading the virus, and there's a lot of racism for the East and Southeast Asian community. So in the UK, racism has increased to over 300% since the pandemic on the East and Southeast Asian community, and I just had enough. And I really hope that one day when my little girl Sadie, she's 2 years old, I really hope one day that when she's older, there'll be no such thing as racism. But that's in a very ideal world. Yeah. And what I really want is if she ever comes across racism or anything that doesn't sound or look right to her, I really want to encourage her to speak up about it, because that's something which I didn't have when I was growing up, because my parents didn't really encourage me to speak up. I was brought up with silence is the solution. Yeah. Don't say anything. My parents would say to me, "Mochosen," which means don't say anything. But I guess they did that because they couldn't really speak English anyway. Yeah. So it's quite difficult for them to speak up as well. And I really don't want that for Sadie. Yeah. And that's a really long answer to why I've started my podcast. But I think for my podcast, I've invited some guests onto the show, so they talk about their experiences, particularly from the East and Southeast Asian background. I also had a guest called Wendy as well, who's Black, and we talk about, Blackout Tuesday and Black Lives Matter. So I'm just trying to increase a lot of diversity, really. But thanks for listening anyway. It's really good. It's really good to hear that.
And you talk about the pandemic increasing racism at the moment, post-pandemic, during pandemic. Have you personally experienced that?
I haven't personally experienced it since the pandemic. When I was a kid, I must have experienced racism a few times a week. A few times a week. Sometimes it'd be every day at school, working at parents' takeaway, or just. So I'm from a town called Macclesfield in the south of Manchester, in Cheshire, and there's at the time anyway, there's very little minorities. There were a few Chinese families, but very, very few though.
There wasn't a community as such.
Yeah, there wasn't really much of that. I remember when I was at school, there was I know that I was the only East and Southeast Asian student. My brother then joined high school 2 years later, so then there was two of us. I think there was a few South Asians, a few Indians and a few Black people, but there wasn't that many of them. And I just found it really tough. It was really tough being a minority at school anyway, particularly back then. The awareness wasn't quite out there yet, and I guess people looked at me like an alien. But then there was all these other things that contributed to that. So as teenagers, I just remember at weekends at school on Friday, all the kids would get really excited, they get that Friday feeling, the weekend off. But in my head, I'm like, I've never liked the weekends, because I knew I'd have to work in a Chippy. And as we got older, 15, 16, 17, I knew that some of my friends or some of the kids in my year, they would come to the chip shop quite drunk, and then I'd have to serve them. Oh my God, it was just so cringy.
And then see them at school again on Monday, I presume.
Yeah. And then I just hated it at the time. I really hated it, and part of me just wanted to be like them, because when you're a teenager, I remember all I wanted to do was just fit in. I didn't want to be Chinese. I hated being Chinese. I hated my flat nose, my dark hair. I got really embarrassed when my parents would speak Chinese to me. And I hated having a chip shop. I hated where I live. I just felt, yeah. But now I feel ashamed that I thought like that, because growing up in my parents' takeaway, working at my parents' takeaway, serving customers when I was 10, managing my parents' takeaway since I was 10, it's really brought me up and shaped me up to how I am now. Like being hard, working hard and never taking life for granted. And from an early age, I've realized how challenging it is to earn money, because my parents went through, they sacrificed so much for us.
Did you appreciate that then? I wonder, was that with the benefit of
not at all,
age and hindsight?
Yeah, I didn't appreciate any of that at all. I didn't appreciate that we had amazing food, like authentic food that my dad cooked for us around the table. Again, at the time, I felt really embarrassed by it, because with Chinese cooking, the authentic way is you sit around the table, there'll be a selection of different dishes in the middle of the table. Everyone would have a bowl of rice and chopsticks, but that was so alien to a lot of the kids who I went to school with. Like they would all have pastas and shepherd's pie and things on the plate, and they would eat with their knife and forks, and they would have starter and some side salad and then dessert at the end, and then they'd sit round as a family, and then they'd have the TV on. The parents would ask them, "Oh, what did you do at school today?" And I never had any of that. It was just like, quick, once there's no customers, let's quickly eat up all our food. And then once we've eaten our food, it's like, right, back to work. But
do you think that if there wasn't work to go back to, then is that just the traditional way of family eating, or is it because you had work to get back to?
Well, yeah, we had work to get back to. And I remember we lived above our takeaway, and where our shop was, we were in a estate called Upton Priory, and it wasn't the nicest of areas. I don't know how it is now, but at the time it was really rough. And I remember and this is a time when obviously there was no delivery or anything like that, so people it was quite old-fashioned. People would have to ring up, place an order, and then come to the takeaway and pick it up. So I'd always be the one. I'd always be the one picking up the phone and taking people's orders, and I would always do my homework in the shop as well. So I used to finish school, go upstairs to the house, and then quickly get changed, bring all my homework downstairs to the shop, and I would work at my parents' shop and also do my homework at the same time. And I used to watch Neighbours and Home and Away at the same time as well. But the thing is, if I didn't help out my parents' shop, I don't know how they would have coped, because their English wasn't really that great. It was busy. They couldn't afford to hire a helper. It's a family takeaway, and
presumably that wouldn't have helped your connections with your schoolmates, because they potentially would be out after school doing whatever. I'm trying to remember now what kids after school do. You wouldn't be able to be part of that, because you'd have obviously work to do and be in the shop.
I remember I did a couple of things after school, like I think there was like a drama club which I did, but I remember when I was doing those after school activities, I remember thinking, oh gosh, I wonder how my mum and dad's getting on. Do you know what I mean?
Always on your mind.
It was always on my mind as well. I mean, my brother's a little bit younger, so sometimes he would help out as well. So we all did, but I don't know. It's just, And
now obviously, now you have a child of your own, and she is. I think from your podcast, she is half English, half Chinese.
She is. She's mixed race. So I've been with my partner Ewan for coming up to 11 years now. He's white. He's Scottish. And so we have Sadie, who is absolutely the love of my life. I never knew being a parent, I never knew you could like your heart would just burst with love.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I can't
I do.
explain it.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, there's some days where I'm just like,
It
it's
wouldn't
like,
be
what's going
normal.
on?
You wouldn't be normal if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, there's no, it's like a switch. It's either 100% amazing or 100% you're at your lowest of low. I've never had an average day, but she's the love of my life. And yeah, and I feel, I don't know, I've learned so much, and she doesn't know this now, obviously, she's so young, but she's really inspired me to be the best person that I can be for her.
Yeah.
And again, just one of the reasons why I started my podcast and my Chinese Chippy Girl Instagram page is because I'm learning myself how to speak up, and learning how to speak up for other people as well on things that really matter to me the most, which is about the ECO community, about racism, and yeah, so I'm really hoping that I'm really hoping that one day when she grows up and she sees something or she feels something that's wrong, she'll be like, do you know what? My mum has encouraged me to speak up, so I'm going to speak up as well. And even if her mouth gets her into trouble, I don't care. I don't care, because I would rather her mouth and her outspokenness, if that's even a word, gets her into trouble rather than staying silent, because I would hate it if she stayed silent and then she would have to carry this silent burden with her.
So she's been born into the world a lot later, so a slightly different time, not perfect time, but a slightly different time, and in a different area of the country, so potentially a more diverse area of the country. So even in her short 2-year lifespan, have you seen anything hopefully positive or negative in her life so far?
Oh, so she's at nursery at the moment, and every week we would get an update from the nursery, just with a weekly roundup with what the kids have eaten this week and what they've learned this week. And it's really nice because obviously it's Chinese New Year coming up. Chinese New Year's on the 12th of February.
Yeah.
And last week they did an email. They sent out an email saying that they've been learning more about the Chinese culture and in the Chinese New Year. It's going to be, the year of the ox. So I thought that was really good. And I remember during the Black Lives Matter movement and Black History Month, the nursery would send some updates about, what the kids have been learning, what they've been reading and everything. So I think that's really encouraging. And that's something which I didn't have when I was growing up. But maybe outside of nursery, I haven't really noticed anything as such. I don't know whether it's because of particularly where I live in East London. It's extremely diverse where I live. And so I haven't really noticed that much. The other thing is as well is I'm with my partner Ewan quite a lot as well. He's white, so I don't know whether that's how should I say it?
Tempers it slightly.
Yeah, I reckon I don't know if my partner, if I had a partner that was Asian, would that have been different?
I think, like you said, you live in a very diverse area anyway.
Yes.
So it's certainly not, you're not going to stand out in an area like East London.
Yeah, definitely. Like if it was Macclesfield, particularly at the time, I remember we used to get quite a lot of stares, and whenever my parents spoke to me in Chinese or we had to speak Chinese, like people would just like look at us, and I don't get that here. But I remember it was just it's just so uncomfortable. It's like, why are you looking at me like that? I'm having a conversation in Chinese with my mum, and that's when I thought, oh, Mum, can you speak to me in English, please? And Mum's like, no, we speak Chinese. And I mean, she had every right to kind of, to tell me that. So yeah.
And also, as a child, when you were a child, you just see it in black and white. You're not going to understand your mother's intentions or why it's so important to her. You're just going to see it as, I'm embarrassed, stop it.
Yeah.
Basically, it's quite simple for kids in that respect.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Sadie then. So obviously she's going to grow up being half Chinese, half Scottish.
Yes.
Which is a great mixture. I'm also a very bizarre mixture, so I can relate to that. I think I've got Sri Lankan, Welsh, Indian, Scottish, English.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
I think that's the general mix, some proportions or other. So obviously from a personal point of view, I think it's great to have a mixed heritage and the culture that you can refer back to and the stories that you can ask family members, etc. So
yeah,
as she grows up, are you going to encourage her to learn a Chinese language, whether that be Mandarin or Cantonese, or so how are you going to take her on her Chinese journey, I suppose?
So I'm on a proper mission to speak Cantonese to her. So I speak Cantonese. I know it's not the most widely spoken Chinese dialect. It's obviously Mandarin. I can't speak Mandarin.
Are they quite
hard.
Are they quite different? Forgive my ignorance, but
no, it's fine. It's a really good question. It's so different. I remember when I first moved to London about so I've been living in London about 14 years now, and must have been about 12 years ago. I learned I did a course learning Mandarin when I was still living in Clapham. I did a course learning how to speak Mandarin. And I went into the course thinking, I'm Cantonese. I'll be able to nail this class. Yeah. No, I didn't. I was like the weakest link because I speak Cantonese. I think my tones were just like all over the place. Yeah, I wasn't very good. But just going back to Sadie, I speak to her in Cantonese.
Right.
My Cantonese is extremely broken, but I can get by. I can go to Hong Kong and speak the language and talk to locals and stuff, but it's not it's quite scratchy. And so one of my I feel for me it's very important that Sadie understands the values and the Chinese culture. Like, I'm excited that Chinese New Year's coming up and she'll be able to start understanding a bit more about what it is. And I mean, it's a shame that there won't be any celebrations this year and no line dancing or anything, but that's fine. And I've been buying some books for her as well, to talk about, or even just to have some illustrations and some characters who look Asian or who look black, just so she knows, just to cover like a bigger diversity. And so I've got so cute. I've got these like cute little chopsticks.
Are they kiddie version or are they adult chopsticks but just smaller?
They're kiddies version, but because we eat with our chopsticks, she always wants what we have, so she takes our huge gigantic chopsticks. We're just like, oh my god, don't poke yourself in the eye. But and obviously we FaceTime my family quite a lot. So my family live in Edinburgh, and so we FaceTime them quite a lot as well. But equally, I think more recently it was Burns Night as well, and in Scotland. So the tradition is haggis, neeps and tatties. So that's where Ewan comes in, and he will play that the Scottish heritage. Sorry, he will play the Scottish heritage part, and so we're trying to, introduce her to all these things and to teach her like all these different types of, particularly our home heritage. That's what matters to us anyway. So
and I have friends, so for example I have a French friend who sends her daughter to French school on a Saturday morning, and similarly there's an Austrian friend I know who sends her son to learn German every Saturday. So is that something that exists for you and that you would do with Sadie?
100% yes. I used to go to Chinese school when I was a kid. And I didn't really stick it out for that long. And honestly, I think it's definitely one of my biggest regrets. It's only because when I must have been about, so I went a couple of times. I kind of went when I was probably about 6 or 7, and then I left, and then I started again when I was 10. And And I remember it used to be on the Sunday, and it was just like, I remember I used to go to, you know, like the British school, work my parents' takeaway, and then it's weekend. And I'd work on parents' takeaway, and then Sunday, I am shattered. So I remember I used to go to Chinese school, and I used to really love it. Well, actually, tell I used to love being around Chinese people because there's something really wholesome about being
Yeah.
with your own majority, quote unquote majority. And it's very comforting, and there was no racism or anything, and I felt like I could be myself. And we all had dark hair, we all kind of, you know, all part of the same race.
Yeah.
And so that was really nice, but it was quite full on having to do a full Sunday at Chinese school. And then I just left, and I just didn't want to do it. And yeah, it's one of my biggest regrets. But I think if it was Sadie, I would like to start, if once the pandemic's over, and obviously when she's old enough, I would like to introduce her and to a Chinese school, so she can learn to read and write Chinese as well. Yeah, and just to encourage her, because I can speak it, but I can't read or write it.
Yeah. I think hopefully in these days it should be a bit more. I mean, for you, you shouldn't have a regret about it, because a full week of school plus working in your parents' chippy plus a full Sunday at Chinese school, that is a lot to take on for anybody. So I wouldn't have any regrets about it. The circumstances were just what they were, I guess.
Okay.
And hopefully for Sadie, obviously technology's moved on a great deal since then.
Yes.
And the options are open, and you live in a more diverse part of the world now. So potentially there are easier ways to integrate her into that community, aren't there, than having to commit to a whole Sunday.
Yeah, definitely. How about you anyway? Did you go to any Sunday schools or anything like that?
My background, because my parents are both half white, so both their mothers were white, and because it's sort of Indian and Sri Lankan, I suppose they're very well. English, for example, is the first language still in a lot of those countries, and they moved here when they were quite young, so they really are sort of English, I suppose, at heart in that sense. So we spoke English at home. They only spoke Hindi or Tamil or whichever language they were picking that day, if they were trying to talk about us, and we didn't really understand. So we always knew something was happening if they were speaking in one of the Indian languages that they know. So no, we didn't have that side of things. And also our family are spread across the world, so they're sort of, I have family in America, Hong Kong, Europe, everywhere. So and everyone's married into different cultures again and again and again. So my husband's white English. I've got cousins who've married Americans. I've got cousins who've married Thai. I mean, it's just the culture mix now is unbelievable, which is great. And it's great. So all of the cousins and the nephews and nieces, there's an amazing melting pot of cultures and races. So it's a wonderful thing. I think that's something to be really proud of in this day and age. That happens, and it's embraced.
Definitely.
Again, depending on where you live, but certainly more than when you were growing up in Macclesfield, I can imagine.
I have a question for you, actually. So maybe it's not meant to do this pod, but do you ever get people asking you, where are you from?
Yeah,
like
always.
And how do you, I'm really intrigued by this, and how do you respond?
I just respond. I mean, I think the question comes up because I'm not obviously from anywhere to look at me. So most people think I'm Italian, Greek, Turkish, Spanish. They never think I'm Asian. They always think I'm something Mediterranean or European. So I can see why the question will come up. And then my name then confuses them more, because Aisha is obviously an Asian name. My maiden name is De Silva, which is Sri Lankan, and my married name is Murray, which is English/Scottish. So I think generally people have a right to be a bit confused and have that question because it's not obvious. So I just answer it honestly and transparently and say, well, actually, my parents are this, my grandparents are this, and that's what I am, a mixture of all that. And just not frightened by the question, or it's quite a nice, it gives me the chance, I suppose, to tell quite a nice story about my heritage and be proud of my heritage and be proud of all the cultures that I can get involved with and talk about. So it's an obvious question to ask, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they feel comfortable they can ask that question. And my daughters look very English.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they've got blue eyes because my husband's got blue eyes. They've got blue eyes and kind of light browny hair and olivey skin. So they're going to be locked up. They are going to be locked up from the age of about 14.
I was just going to say, they sound gorgeous.
But I'm biased, but yes, they are gorgeous. Yes, but they're going to have to be taught the ways of the world, and taught to, as you said, taught to speak up, be strong, be confident. Yeah. Teenagers and women, and that's what our job is, isn't it? As parents, is to use our own experiences and everything we've been through. So in your case, obviously, it's your upbringing, being a BBC, and then pass on those experiences and allow them to grow into whoever they grow into, but with our supports and with our learnings, and then just let them find their way. Really, that's all we can do, isn't it? All we can do as parents is do our best with them.
Definitely. I'm really excited to see what Sadie will be like as a person. I know I've got a long few years to go because she's only 2, but I don't know, I'm very curious to know, like, will she be like me, and will she be quite outspoken, and or will she be a bit too outspoken, and I'm excited to, and I don't know, just for us to know, like, you know, she's going to be with a group of friends. Will she be the leader of the pack, or will she be the one that sits back, and, like, you know, if she has some sweets, will she share it out with all her friends, or will she just, hide it, keep it to herself? I don't know. It's just so when I hear, like, stories of people's kids like yours and they're a bit older, I'm just thinking, I wonder if Sadie's going to be like that too. I don't know.
And I just love thinking about that. You won't have to wait very long, because by the time they're 4 or 5, you see this is my personal experience. By the time they're 4 or 5, you see their personality coming through, and you see. I mean, I've got 2, so I can compare the 2, obviously, but my 2 are completely different. They're completely different people, and they've been brought up by the same parents in the same way, but obviously different circumstances. My oldest didn't have a sibling because she was the first, etc. Now my youngest has an older sister, so that's different, a different dynamic. But they're entirely different people. Entirely different people. My oldest is very, very sociable, centre of attention, very creative, and my youngest just is very, very not anti-people, but doesn't really like people that much. She takes a long time to win her trust. A long time.
Oh, really? Okay.
And she's much quieter, much more studious, much more academic. The old one will be friends with anybody, which is more of a worry, and would far rather be just flitting about talking to people than doing any kind of schoolwork. So very different. But you'll know quite quickly.
Wow, they sound completely different.
Yeah, they are very different. And you'll know soon. You'll know soon enough which way, what the sort of traits that are coming out. I guess her personality traits will start coming out, and it is fascinating. It's fascinating to watch them grow, because they're a mixture of you and your partner. And you both have different parenting styles that you're not even aware of necessarily, and they take on different traits from both of you. Create this whole new being.
It's so funny you should say that, because I feel I'm not the fun parent. So my partner, Ewan, he's a fun parent. He's the one that will play football with her in the house, or, that he'll take her out, particularly during lockdown, because I started my new job during the first lockdown back in March, and he got put on furlough, so he had a lot of free time. So just slowly but surely, he then became the fun one, because I had to work, and he was the one taking her out on the bike, playing football with her outside, and taking her for walks, going to see the ducks. And but then if she gets upset, or if she wakes up in the middle of the night and she cries, then that's when she needs me. That's when she needs me. So she would want me, but there's times when, because Ewan's a fun one, she would go to, where our bicycle helmet is and our shoes. She would go to the hallway, grab his shoes or his helmet, walk past me, go straight to Ewan, as if like he needs to take her out. And I'm like, I'm free, I could take you out. She's like, because she's not quite talking yet or anything. So it's just everything's sort of action talks louder than words at the moment. And it's like yesterday when I picked her up from nursery, I could hear her coming through the door. She didn't see me, but I could hear her, and she would say "Baba, Baba, Baba," but that's what she calls him. But I'm Mama, and I'm like,
But you're labelling yourself. You're labelling yourself as not the fun one. She's not labelling you as that.
I don't know. This is just how I feel. I mean, it's quite funny though. It's quite funny. But yeah, I don't know.
So Georgie, I think we're probably coming to the end of our time now. So I'm sure, and I think probably for you, talking about obviously the premise of your podcast of being a BBC, British-born Chinese, etc., that you'd be really happy to hear from other people in those communities, perhaps come forward and speak up. So what's the best way to get hold of you in that case?
So yes, you can find me on Chinese Chippy Girl on Instagram, or you could email me on chinesechippygirl@gmail.com. I've also got my podcast is also called Chinese Chippy Girl. I'm on basically all the pod platforms, Spotify, Apple Pod, Google Pod. So yeah, feel free to take a listen, and yeah, I'd love to hear from you. So anyone, if you've listened to the show and you want to get in touch, please, drop me a message. I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. I would really recommend listening to your podcast, actually. I thought it was fascinating just to hear it again.
Oh, thank you.
I think I said to you before, I don't have any friends in that community, so it's all new information for me. And it was just fascinating to hear about your upbringing. And so we've talked about it a bit today, but if anyone wants to hear it much more in depth in your podcast, I would definitely recommend finding it on all those platforms.
Thank you
mentioned.
so much.
No, you're welcome. So thank you so much for being here. It was great to talk to you, Georgie. Good luck with you and with little Sadie. I'm sure she'll grow up to be everything that you want her to be.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You're most welcome. It's been great. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
As a fellow mum of children with a mixed cultural background, I found it fascinating talking to Georgie today about her experiences of growing up, of working in her parents' chip shop, of the experiences she had being a British-born Chinese, and how now those experiences are going to help her shape her daughter's future and shape the way that she brings up her daughter. So again, I highly recommend listening to her podcast, Chinese Chippy Girl, and I look forward to seeing you here next time.